the asterisks undefined powers that don't belong to the president and vote neg for limits every single condition or resolution acts as a functional restriction on the same single process of war powers authority. Dozens of tiny mechanisms with small subsets areas create an infinite number of us, and the core lid doesn't check. Next, counterplay. Text Obama should issue an executive order clarifying what the offensive cyber operation and conducted according to the Intelligence Authorization of Air Act for fiscal years 1991 definitions of regulation of covert action, and counterplan comparatively solves case best while preserving presidential flexibility. Verse 12. The federal government should adopt the presumption cyber acts to be carried out in the covert action section. The best way for president to issue executive order to make the covert action regime presumptive for an internal executive process might mitigate the risk of a cyber attacks issue. And the only covert action regime provides an adequate role for Congress and executive order with preferable because practical differences passed into new legislation. Adopting covert action framework would be a principal way to ensure the constitutional legitimacy and power of president. Power is bounded by credibility depend on the perception of presidential compliance and domestic law. Compliance would encourage the covert action procedure in the closest cases without unduly restricting the executive stress using military authority. Integrates the statutory control as needed information whether Congress may give knowledge of necessary craft and legislation in order to follow by adoption in order to help to constrain the future administration. Presumption through executive order establishes a stable legal framework that allows for law to follow policy and permits the decision-making board before passing the detailed section that may result in unintended consequences. And next, politics. Patent reform will pass now, but Obama's PC is key. Patent 35 of the patent crackdown could be one of the few bills to make it Obama's SS stand a good chance even the collection year. Even the focus on patent reform light will look into action in the legislative month, and Obama has called for action and State of the Union address, and President Obama president's backing will help with legislation across the finish line of the Senate. May the last of the Senate have the president waiting like that. Obama's support will also create momentum in the House and convince Democratic lawmakers who may not be focused on the issue to hop on board. And OCO legislation is unpopular. Congress thinks it would burden the president and could get bogged down in amendments. Verse 12. The law governing the cyber attacks is very difficult, passing numerous stages in which the bill can be stalled or killed, may be bogged down in amendments and causes loose support and subjective Senate bill filibuster, and properly burden the president and national security, increasing importance and Congress institution equivalent the president's prerogative. And the plan resparks congressional fighting over war powers, drains PC, Cohen 11. The endless Washington debate over the president's power to go to war as resurfaced from main rhetorical reports. Congress might see to defund the military effort against the minority charged political environment. Political wrangler and war powers is common in Washington, and with the president seeking to expand the freedom and the Congress battling over the exerted influence of the process. And Obama will fight the plan. Silver C9. Obama seems to be embracing and extending those policy choices, clearly interested in maintaining the strong executive power. The new administration has copied most of the Bush program committed in building and strong executive power. And patent reform key to business innovation and ensuring companies are effective. Black 14. Obama's call for patent reform bill to keep the business focused on innovation and the patent trolls are multi-billion dollar during the economy, and American businesses have found themselves tied up in litigation and threats, exorbitant threats, and forced to spend money on frivolous lawsuits and have companies lost in billions in legal fees and payouts, and businesses small and large from all sectors need help. And that's key to overall economy. Horror 12. Americans have excelled in innovation and new ideas and transforming them into products that make the world run. Only by tapping on our tradition of innovation can we continue to lead the global economy. Investments in innovation will enable us to move to our forward economy recovery before we can afford to see the leadership role or allow our innovation to erode our economic future will be fueled by a limitless energy innovation, energy to innovate, and if we can do so, there's no limit to what we can do. And economic decline turns structural violence, exacerbates poverty, and causes widespread mental trauma. WVU 11. The poor will be the hottest by economic crisis. Economic crisis increase of poverty. The crisis increased by households and the high debt and rare persistence of evictions, and crisis increase in social exclusion and vulnerable groups and low-income people and people. Living near poverty line and effects of extreme poverty include the deficits in the cognitive, emotional, physical, and development, and the consequences that are lifelong enduring recessions and social inequality and health can widen into death, financial difficulties, housing payments problems, lead mental health problems. Economic crisis is likely to have negatively affect health. And next, war powers are beyond the scope of judiciary, and it represents a court when it pertains to political questions. Fisher 5. The courts are poorly suited to decide whether war power and foreign affairs, legal literature, and foreign policy, war and peace is beyond the scope of judicial cognizance and the attitudes right to contemporary scholarship. Foreign affairs work through the constitution of the core political questions case, and war powers is the most sensitive and the critical manifestation and exercise of foreign relations in the name of the court. And foreign affairs and courts issues in the courts of par excellence for the application of political questioning doctrine. The war powers refers to foreign relations and political question, lack of judiciary discoverable and manageable standards for resolving the disputes and reasons to avoid the decision. And war powers cases are non-justiciable, and violating PQD would result in deterioration of separation of power and lack of presidential accountability. And Balfour and Question whether reformulation of political question doctrine facilitates the presidential accountability in the exercise of war powers. Doctrine limits the justification of a political question, and the doctrine of separation of power concern is more, courts are more likely to merits of the case, and the courts apply the political question of doctrine and the lack of accountability justify the court appeal to the political question doctrine because the judicial decision would usurp the president's ability. Case was just non-justiciable, and the court maintained the appropriate constitutional role and non-justiciable, not the court abdication of the power of judicial review, but also the appropriate restraint and exercise of power of the court decision in the case would violate the separation of powers principle, and the court decision could abuse the court's power of judicial review. And separation of power, key to prevent totalitarianism. Bill 67, the growth of three branches of government system demands different set of values to be embodied in the procedure of different agencies and a representation of varying interests in separating their interests and aspects of doctrine, and clearly central the whole pattern of Western constitutionalism, the diffusion of authority among the different centuries of decision making, and the antithesis of totalitarianism with absolutism, and the totalitarian to every aspect of the state machine is more merely an extension of party apparatus, and subordinate efforts have made to prevent any division in the machine and developing its own interests and creating the degree of autonomy and taking decisions and the ideal a totalitarian state in the single cell embracing agency of government and the separation of agencies is centralized development theory which assumes that the government must be checked internally. The creation of autonomous centers of power which will develop an institutional interest, and separation of powers will begin, and might still expect to see some limitation in the ability of the single group to dominate the government and separate agencies is established. And totalitarianism produces a culture of violence that outweighs all other impacts. 2010. Totalitarianism is a system based on violence and becomes a real dominant value and turns into an integrated system because of cultural value and forms a concerns the whole institution of state society, and the only cause of maintaining the existence of state power inside the outside level ultimately becomes a source of legitimacy. Totalitarian regimes support encourage the transnational terror and eagerly pursue the WMD and the other violent means of international politics. Violence democracy is unable to maintain and keep the system itself at democratic international level, and authoritarian regime is totally aware that indispensable and compatible foreign context and sustainability of its rule and solvency. Obama will circumvent the plan Living 12. The DWC and the WPR Congress give the control over the war power, and Obama is advanced bound by Obama its adoption position, and the president has the inherent authority to deploy forces. The result is potentially relaxed restraint and the presidential authority leeway for unilateral executive action when increase the arsenal and continue to modernize the president, and argue that absence of war leaves him of power, and Obama has shown the willingness to the definition and service of expanding the executive power, the temptation of the powers is significant. Obama has followed the executive to evade the country as much as possible, and signaling signing statements takes out the Constitution Al 13. The president's attempt to transform the statutory authority and circumvent the law, signing statements and introvert conflict and encourage the presidential unilateralism. Such action poison relations in Congress. The signing statements nullify the statutory provisions of statements and encourage the belief that the court is not what put in public line. Signing statements lack the clarity in which it creates a confusion, ambiguity, and muddle of the president to intend, and Obama signing statements resort to vagaries. And when the president intends to ignore the statutory provisions, there is sufficient confusion and prevent universal response. If scholars disagree about the meaning of doubtful, the layperson could discern the president's intention. And CAS means OCOs are circumvented. Virtue 12. Covert action statute enables that any entity in the conduct cyber attacks pursuant to a legal framework combining the reporting requirements of the unity of legal authority will be the lines of intelligence, military functions, and continue to order the source and the choices in a particular cyber attack is meant to be deniable. And secrecy means that the plan will get circumvented by spy programs. Gilman and Miller 13. There's a mindset in the national security community that American people have resisted transparency, access to details about the U.S. spy programs without precedent, and the gasp of the structural operation of the intelligence bureaucracy has been totally beyond the public reach, and the kind of much material is not available. And DOD circumvents Cohen 13. The Pentagon acknowledged that it was setting up a series of cyber teams in charge of carrying offensive cyber operations. 13 cyber teams were formed, and stressing their role with the offensive directive enables us to be flexible. And the affirmatives anthropomorphizes warfare, creating a war machine. Their framing of the war as an autonomous makes the war inevitable by removing human responsibility. Pick 93. Battle is nothing more than autonomy. The war machine, the unstoppable engagement, makes war become modern truism. A question of why what war is a question of human agency. Once it started to move the power of human agency, modern war like forest fire. Once it's started, nothing can set beyond the resultant conflagration. Stand ready for process. Market conflagration. Start process.
Okay, let me just get a timer real quick.
Yeah.
Let's go to the patents, DA. So you read this card at the top of the flow, and you say patent reform will pass now, but the first sentence in the actual text says the patent crackdown could be one of the few bills to make it to President Obama's desk, and I Googled it, and it's currently not even on the docket. So I think that I don't understand how you're using this card as patent reform will pass now.
Sure. So the first line you're right is the patent crackdown could be one of the few bills to make it to Obama's desk. And then the next part is that this does stand a good chance, even in election year, of being passed. Anybody who had to write politics this weekend knows that everything else is a wash. CIR is not going to get passed. Everything is either pushed for the long term or it's just not going to happen. Patent reform is definitely one of those things that has the possibility of really getting up there, getting on Obama's desk and getting pushed, but it needs Obama's
right? And I think that like this card is mistagged because you say patent reform will pass now when it hasn't even made it to the docket and we have no time frame for when it actually will.
For when it will pass?
For when it will even be on the docket.
What's your logic for not being on the docket?
We can move on. What is it?
What's your logic for it not being on the docket?
It's currently not on the docket.
Where's your evidence?
What? I just Googled it. I mean, I can cut it into a card and give it to you if you want. But okay. So let's go to the second DA. So, can you just explain why the war powers can't be ruled on in the courts?
What we're saying with our second DA is basically that there still needs to be a separation of power.
It's a matter of, what happens is that when it comes to the courts, there are political questions in reference to war powers or foreign affairs. And specifically what happens is that when courts overstep this boundary, they destroy their own accountability and they skew what it means to be a part of the checks and balances of the separation.
Okay, but in a world where the president might be overstepping his boundary, who should check him? Like if courts aren't the right actor, who is?
Congress.
So Congress is the only branch of government that can check other branches?
Congress or the executive himself.
Or he himself should check himself?
Yeah.
Okay.
Also will depend on the courts, if they ever dispute accountability, they would abuse power much worse than the president, because it's a question of legitimacy. They literally stay in there.
Okay, you read this Crouch 13 evidence on the case flow. Signing statements take out the app.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So the exact warrant is that signing statements nullify statutory provisions. Statements encourage the belief that the law is not what Congress puts in the law. So they lack clarity. So just because Congress would pass this, it doesn't mean it would necessarily have the clarity it needs.